Hi, Kim.
Hey, Patricia. How are you? How was your week?
It's going well. It's busy here at the UMD Art Gallery. We're doing a lot of work. We have an exhibition that's up right now, a faculty exhibition. We had Los Angeles-based artist Hannah Ward. Shout out to Hannah who visited
Yay!
us. Yes, she was here and she gave a wonderful lecture about her painting and her artistic practice. And we're getting ready to start putting together the artworks we're going to show in the spring for our spring exhibitions. How about you?
Oh my God, that sounds so cool. I'm good. It was a really busy week. I had an opening on the weekend and I had a collector group come over for a studio visit. And these are always interesting groups. You never know what you're going to get. You never know if they're really into what you're doing or not into what you're doing. That it can always be like a little bit of a gamble. And I wasn't prepared to talk.
Oh.
And the organizer of the thing was like, and Kim will give us a little talk. And I was like, oh, I'm super glad I've done this a million times because I have not quite my elevator pitch, but more of my like elevator ramble.
But sometimes those are the best moments, and sometimes those moments are most spontaneous, and you ended up having to use the most direct language to describe your work, right? And it's good, it's productive.
No, it was actually, I was like, first of all, I felt like I was turning bright red. Like I could feel my face flush. And then afterwards I was talking with some of the collectors and they were like, oh my God, that was so great. And I'm like, oh wait, am I not bright red? They're like, no, you're fine. And that was amazing. It felt practiced. It felt like you were on point. You were hitting all of these different points. You were moving at a good clip. They were like, this was really impressive. We can't believe you didn't prepare. So to your point, yeah. I mean, not having the anxiety and the worry of like, oh my God, I have to perform. And then just being like, oh, here you go. That kind of worked.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And then you have, because it happens the same thing to me with teaching. Sometimes when I'm like super prepared and, I have this very specific script of everything I'm going to say, it doesn't,
Yeah.
It's not as good. So,
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, I feel like we're kind of touching on the subject that we're going to be talking about in today's episode. So I'm feeling like maybe we should move on.
Yes.
Welcome to the Art Equation.
Welcome to The Art Equation, a podcast from Now Be Here. I'm one of your hosts, Patricia Ortega, and our historian and independent curator.
I'm your other host, Kim Schoenstatt, a contemporary artist and organizer of Now Be Here, a directory of and for women and non-binary artists.
On this podcast, we have a little charla, a little bachipapo about making art and making exhibitions. We invite fellow artists, curators, archivists, and people from different areas of the art world to share their knowledge and their experience.
We are curious about what goes on in the day-to-day of arting. We want to talk shop, get in the weeds about what goes into art shows, talk with the makers and the doers of the art world. Welcome to the Art Equation. Okay, welcome back. So, Patricia, how do you use your time?
So, that's a good question. I have to divide my time in many different tasks and things that I do that include research, writing, teaching, curating. Right now, I'm doing all of these things. I guess, having a structure and system really helps me stay focused and accomplish all of these projects. But it's also a lot of times about improvising and about going with the flow. And so when we're thinking about this question of process, I'm thinking about the idiosyncratic or unique ways in which process sort of shapes itself. How is it for you, Kim?
I mean, the daily practice of being an artist definitely has its rhythms. Like I have my morning admin And then once I push off everything administrative that I need to do, which has like a lot of different little threads there, then I can sort of settle in and get to work in the afternoon. And then sometimes if I'm really under deadline, then things get truncated, right? Like we were working on this really big exhibition, and so the admin got cut down to like an hour. And it all does kind of inform itself, like it all is all towards the same goal. But structuring time, I find it's really helpful to have that kind of delineation of like, okay, I have to stop doing admin now, because sometimes you can just kind of keep going. Like it can get really overwhelming.
Definitely. Same for me. I have a very strict writing schedule, and there are all these books that I got when I started the writing process, the big project of a dissertation, where they teach you how to create your writing habit and how to get really good at the craft of research. And I have another book that's called The Mystifying Dissertation Writing, right? It's all of these wonderful resources that basically teach you to have some structure and have a system, right? But like I was saying, this is something that ends up sort of shaping itself. And writing to me it's not only a habit, but now it's something that it's my life. It's just what I do all the time. So I had a friend once tell me, that you are already like into good writing momentum when you can write from anywhere. Like even if you're on a train, if you're like on top of a tree or you're walking, you're writing all the time. And I think it's true.
Oh, that's interesting. And I like what you said about habit, because part of forming a habit and training your brain and my body to be ready to go, right? Like there are certain rituals that have to go into place. Like another artist that I was just thinking of, the way that she would get into being like psychologically and physically ready to make work was Agnes Martin. She would take long walks, and then like that would kind of clear her mind, clear her body, get her mind into another space. I mean, artists, we tend to kind of need habits and rituals in order to get into the right like mind space or zone or whatever you want to call it. But the funny thing is, I had dinner with a surgeon this weekend, ironically, and I was asking him about that. Like, how do you get into the right zone? And he was talking exactly about that. He said, I have very specific habits. I have a very specific procedure because I have to be 100% fully present and fully there. And I think artists kind of do the same thing.
But it's a similar thing for me too. I now factor in what we might call unproductive time, because to me it's as important as productive time. And right now there is the whole thing about technology sort of saving us time or helping us be more efficient. But I think that sometimes is detrimental to the natural and organic nature of process, right? Which necessarily requires, as you say, that we slow down, that we take time for just looking, right? Thinking, creating in a much more pressure-free environment.
100%. Like, okay, I know that I need buffer time between writing an intense email and jumping into work. If I don't have, like, I'm going to go take a bathroom break or take some water or reset a little bit, then I know that it's not going to be like a great day in the studio. Unless it's a really prescriptive thing that I have to do. Like if I really just have to like embroider, because part of my work right now involves embroidery, but if what I have to do is just embroider this one section and it's this really easy stitch, then I can just sort of like jump right back into it. But if I'm working with the paint, my body, my mind, everything has to be ready. And that's a good point of like the psychological aspect of being prepared and ready and knowing and organizing in your brain like what you want to do.
So I'm so curious about this juxtaposition of embroidery and paint in your work. Which one is more challenging? Which one? I know they're probably obviously completely different processes, but what? How do you make that decision of today I'm going to work on embroidery and today I'm going to work on paint? What's the disposition between those two?
For me, the painting is much more challenging because it's chaos. Because with the paint, I'm controlling and I'm having, you kind of get one shot. Lately, I've been doing the embroidery first and then letting the stain seep in. And I like the way that it interacts. I like that chaotic action. I like that I like the way that the embroidery kind of buckles and moves and stuff like that. But the embroidery is very it's math. Even the complicated stitches, it's like 3 up, 1 over, 2 down. Like the embroidery is definitely one that I can kind of zone out to, but the staining is one where I have to be mentally, physically ready in an action way. Like my body has to be loose. Like I do stretches. Like it's kind of an interesting thing. Wait, but I have a question about installation. So you said earlier that you guys were installing in the faculty show at the gallery. Now, I find installations exhausting. Like I'm physically tired at the end of the day because I'm using a lot of my brain to like problem solve and to manage things. And then I'm using a lot of my body to like physically move things around and kind of do stuff. How is it from the curatorial end?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but right now we have somebody who's doing the installation. Finally, yay! Shout out to Corey. Oh my gosh, Corey has saved our lives. He's now officially the person who is in charge of doing all the installations. So, Taras Matla and I, and my colleague, we work on design, right? Like exhibition design, where things are going to go, how the works are going to be displayed, more of that curatorial work. But we don't do the installation. But I do miss those days of painting walls and measuring walls and like handling the works on site in the space. It's fine. We still do some of it, but it's not as involved.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't always go to plan though, right? Like you plan out an exhibition, you kind of know where everything's going to go. And then what happens? What's the moment when you're just like, oh my God, that doesn't look great?
Yeah, well, it's a very physical process, even though now we have all of this software, SketchUp.
Right. I mean, you have an installer, but
even there are tools for designing an exhibition using a software that allows you to see everything, and it's pretty accurate. And then you go there and do the installation, and that's it. But it depends, Kim, the kind of work you're installing, right? If you have a lot of work that is that is different, right? If the work's boundaries are a little bit more expansive, if they're like complex installations or videos that require a lot of technology or these kinds of works, it's a little bit more difficult, and it will probably involve more time working on the site.
Right. And have you had that moment where you've installed like a work that is an installation piece, and then realized that while it's physical boundaries and at certain places, the sort of perception, right? Like when you're approaching the piece, it feels bigger and you need to adjust the other pieces. Has that happened?
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. You're there and you had an idea of how things were gonna look, but then you realize that being physically present in the space with all the works, you all of a sudden get this optical experience, right? That then you need to adjust works, because then they start engaging a lot more in a dialogue, right? That's embodied, and that is about movement, right? You're there physically and you're moving around, and you want things to be in dialogue, to interact in particular ways, something that you are not seeing when you're just planning visually, right? With a blueprint or a map.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember the moment when Google SketchUp kind of came on the scene, mm-hmm. and a lot of artists started using it because frankly, it was a little faster and easier to use that than to make our foam core models. I mean, I still make a model of the space. Generally, I'll make both a physical model and a digital model, because in order to really see, like, I can see in a 1/4 inch scale or an 1/8 inch scale what the gallery space will look like, but actually seeing how the pieces are going to feel when you're walking around, 3D modeling really helps with that.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I have worked with Miami-based artists who I hope we can have on the show. She is just a wonderful artist, somebody who I've worked very closely with. Her name is Karen Reifus. And Karen, for a while, was doing this cord installations. And that was what she did for a long time. And they were size specific, right? So she worked with maquettes. She built maquettes to be able to see what the work was going to look like in space. Well, now she has a collection of all of these maquettes that can be exhibited on their own, right? As works on their own. They are part of her process, and yet they're these wonderful little objects.
And are they all shows that actually existed?
Yeah.
Or are some of them proposals for shows that never came to fruition?
I think they're all shows that existed.
So she's having like a miniature, like a dollhouse version of her. It's sort of like a retrospective in Dollhouse.
Yes, it's amazing.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I really like that because it's also inviting the public to understand exactly how much thinking goes into an exhibition. Because this is one of the challenges or not challenges, but some of the conversations that I have, like the art world, we're a very specialized little industry, and everybody within the art world knows what everybody does. But when you go outside the art world, then people are like, what's a curator? What's an installer? What is this? What is that? The roles become very
fluid.
It's a pretty opaque thing.
It is, and I'm glad you talk about that, because it's about this lack of boundaries in what all of this art-related activity implicates. And yes, like for example, somebody like Karen is when she is creating these maquettes, she has to take all the measurements from the space. So she's already doing the work of the curator in terms of installing, right, or deciding the installation, because this is what size specific works are about, right? But at the same time, she's being an installer as well, like that. It's now a sort of professionalized field, which, as a matter of fact, has been taken up by artists. I have several friends here in DC, but also in Miami, who worked at major museums like the Perez Museum here at the Smithsonian Museum. And they're artists who have gone into repairs or installation. Some of them are framers, right? But they studied art, so they are artists. And they're going into these jobs to be able to, support themselves. Also, these are jobs that allow a lot of flexibility, so they can continue doing their artistic practice while having a job that's somewhat related to art. So, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, that also touches in on sort of like most artists have day jobs, right? Living is pretty expensive, so you have to have some form of consistent and predictable income, because we really don't have the patronage system that, say, a lot of European countries have. I wanted to get back on, you touched on something, which is that some artists go into an exhibition knowing what it's going to look like. And I have to say, I totally do that. I have so many friends who, when we are asked to do an exhibition, we begin to visualize what it is as a complete whole. And it does...
The anal artist?
Well, but we do have something to say, right? And so if you consider the entire space and what the viewer experience is in moving through that space, then I find it's a really complete experience for everybody. Mm-hmm. But it does start a dialogue between the artist and the curator. And it's always like this question of like, you have to kind of probe and ask where your boundaries are. Have you ever had an artist go a little off the rails?
I mean,
not naming names, but
it is difficult. It's a collaborative job, right? A collaborative process. And it's great when you communicate with the artist and you and everything flows. And like we had to install the work of Daniela Libertad. We had this wonderful and beautiful exhibition of her works, which her works deal a lot with this question of boundaries, and she works with very fragile materials like paper, and her work is very much process based. So a lot of times we're installing like the big piece of paper where she just made a lot of scribbles and then erased, and we're collecting the pieces of the what do you call that, the not the crumbles of the erasing.
Oh, sure. It's almost like the shavings, the sort of like...
The shavings, that's what they're called. The shavings of the... Right? And so, and displaying that and showing that. And so, it's all, right, about helping the artists, right, tell their narrative, So, for that exhibition, I was working on a site-specific installation where she also used core, like yarn, and she covered these 2 columns in the gallery. She wrapped them, basically, and we were working for like 10 hours or 10 hours each day for like 3 days, and it was just insane.
Okay, so there's your physical, and I bet you were exhausted.
Mm-hmm. I was exhausted, but it was so beautiful. Then,
right?
Yeah.
When you're done, like, how great did those columns look when you were done?
It was amazing. We were recently reconnecting, and she said that it was like a dance between us and in the space, and it was like such a beautiful metaphor for what it is to work collaboratively with an artist.
But I think that's when the best exhibitions really happen. And I know that, it's a little weird when the artist is dead, but like with living artists, those to me are the most rewarding, is when everybody's sort of like in a yes and mode.
When it's one artist, you really want to you show the work of an artist because you like it, right? Because you find value in it. So you want the work to be the start, to tell its own narrative and to speak, to be able to speak for itself. And so you are there as a supporting actor, I guess, right?
I don't know. I don't think it's a supporting actor. I think it is a dialogue. I think that a really good curator, my favorite curators, have said, like, sometimes sat back and been like, I really need to understand why we're doing this part. Or I get that you really want to do this thing over here, but it doesn't make sense for the exhibition. And here's how we're thinking about this. Because in my mind, like, I'm thinking a lot of times very intuitively about an exhibition. I know it so deeply, and I'm not always the most verbal. Like, I'm not always the best at using sort of clean philosophic language to talk about my work. But curators, like, you all have this like brain that blows me away, because you see the forest in a way.
Yes, it is a dialogue. Sometimes it's a fight.
And sometimes it's a productive fight. Like, those fights can be really generative, right?
And sometimes it's not only a fight or a dialogue with the artist, but then you're also maybe dealing with the gallery that represents them. And they're also dealing with, I don't know, like a lot of other voices, even like the institutional voice, right? There are so many layers to that process.
I think that's a whole other episode. Because that's a really tricky one. That we could really get in. I think we're going to need some more people on the show to really parse that one out. But that is a really good point, Patricia, because there are, it's a little easier when it's just 2 people having a conversation. But when you start to have all of these very vested, very pointed, very specific interests coming in and pushing, in certain directions, sometimes it's hard to resist.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. It's always challenging, and you're coming from different places. I come from art history, so I'm always going to be thinking about the context, the history, connections. I'm always going to be making connections and things. I can't not approach the work of an artist without understanding where they've been, where they're coming, right? Like what.
So that was another question that I had for you, is like, when you're deciding to work with an artist, have you done the deep dive like that?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you look at the work, you're like, I'm in love, I have a crush, I want to work on this show, and then you do the deep dive?
Both. I think you fall in love with work even before you know anything about the artist, but I think it usually it's just a first impression. I think the falling in love really takes place when you start learning more and more, and the more that you learn about the work or the artist, it fascinates you, but also you're able to see its importance and its impact within the context, which artists, a lot of times, they don't see it.
No.
Artists work sometimes in a very blindfolded way, where they're so immersed in their work that they don't see this sort of larger or broader context, right?
Yeah. No, totally. And I almost think that it's almost not my I don't know. I don't think of my work. I don't think about my work in a context. I just think I'm just trying to get the work done and get it into the world.
That's where curators come and do their little curator's magic.
See, this is why I wanted to do this podcast with you, because it's like we're really coming from both angles. Like you need both of us to do anything, any show or even an article. Like you need all these bits. And so it's really fun talking with you about this stuff.
It's fun talking to you too. With an artist like you, I always enjoy these conversations. First, because I absolutely adore your work. I'm a huge fan. And then because you're so open always to talking about what you do and your process and other artists. And so thank you so much.
Well, the other artist advocacy is a big one for me, as you know. I mean, that's why Now Be Here is what it is. Like, I'm very dedicated to this idea that the art ecosystem doesn't exist without artists advocating for each other. Like, that is the only way artists will survive, is if we help each other and we advocate for each other, and we're always shouting each other's names to whoever will listen, right? Like if somebody's like, oh, I want to come to your studio, I'm always like, oh, and there's all these other artists around here, like you should go here, and what about this? And if you're interested in this, go here and go here and go here. Like that kind of generosity is really important because it is such a small community. But I know sometimes that it's hard. Sometimes you just really need to make rent, and you just really need that one sale to make it happen. So it's a interesting thing.
Yeah, and in my opinion, it's also very productive to have a space, the space that you've created for these conversations with artists and like connecting people and bringing people together, bringing artists together is super important, especially in this world of individualism that we experience.
Oh yeah, the artist identity could be a completely other episode, 100%.
Or even a topic that I'm fascinated by. I hosted a panel discussion once from one of my classes on museum studies and gallery practice about artist community, artist communities in general, right? It's present reality, it's present moment, and historically as well. I think it's an interesting topic for me to explore that.
Oh, what a great conversation! Thanks so much, Patricia.
No, my pleasure, Kim. This is always so exciting and generative for me. So I'm always looking forward. Yeah,
I can't wait to see what our topic is for next week.
Yes. Yes, I'm brainstorming already. So
I know. I like after today's conversation, I'm like, oh my God, we can go in 5 different directions here. We should do some thank yous. Thank you so much to Sky Park Tausig for being our amazing producer. Thank you to Ross Matla at the University of Maryland Art Gallery. And thank you to Jonathan Formansky for letting us use your music.
bye. We are The Art Equation. You can find us wherever you listen every other Thursday.
Thanks for being here with us. We'd really love to hear your thoughts. So please subscribe. And if you have a moment to leave a review, it really helps us out. We love the feedback. Talk to you soon here on The Art Equation. The Art Equation is a podcast from Now Be Here with support from the University of Maryland Art Gallery. Now Be Here is a directory and resource created by and for women and non-binary artists. You can find more information at www.nowbehereart.com.